So sorry, the video was stopped. So let's continue. So supposedly, I mean, an angel now transfer you to a random place in Venus, and you cannot come back, and you cannot avoid it. But you have two privileges. First, you are promised that you will be transferred to a place that there are like among human, among like when there are humans. I mean, there are titans. I mean, not just to the middle of the ocean, and not to like to the middle of icy tundra where you will be alone with only the animal, the animals from the beginning of the Empire Strikes Back. The like the one in the cave. I don't know what's his name. Like I'm not that one of I'm not that fan of Star Wars, but the white monster from the cave. So no, you're going to be transferred to a place with humans. And second, you have a privilege. Another privilege is to choose. You cannot choose. I mean, you cannot you cannot choose a place, and you don't even like know what the names of the places. But I mean, the cherub or the engine, I mean, they gave you the decision to choose between two kinds of places. One kind of place is a village of the type that is described in this story. A village in which, like, when they know about this kind of, and they do it from time to time, like this ritual of the Two Mermaids. And the other options is other place where there are humans in Venus. But that it does not comply with the description of the village as is described in this story. So what would you prefer? What's your preference? What would you choose? So, I mean, you can choose whatever you want, but if you ask me, what would I choose? Definitely the first option. Because this is indeed a representation of the highest culture that you can find in this place. I mean, it's correct. It's not just a toxic remark. It's correct. And other places are much more cruel because they don't even have the technology in the broad sense. Again, when I say technology for, especially for primitive people, but it's true to any kind of people, is something that embraces in itself also logistics, like אגף טכנולוגיה ולוגיסטיקה שאומרים בצה"ל, אט"ל. So this is like how primitive people work. Like, I mean, the technology and logistics they are lumped together because that's the way it is. I mean, like for primitive societies. That technology is not like all sort of like inventions like from like Archimedes inventions or Pythagoras inventions or whatever. It's just it's also like logistical procedures of how to handle inventory and how to handle and how to distribute stuff and how to store stuff, things like that. This is also it was a huge part of Egyptian technology. Logistics. How to this is mentioned even in the book of Genesis, like how to be able to store stuff for a long time and to distribute it to people. This is it's basic stuff, but it's incredibly important, and it's not that basic actually when it's done in for large scale of people. So other places probably would have been much cooler, and your life expectancy in other places would have been much lower. Because obviously they don't do it every day. Obviously, this is something that is done once, like in I don't know. Not every day, not every month. You do understand it. They don't have It's not like the Aztecs that they have enough people to sacrifice a person every day and sometimes even every hour. Like in the Aztec civilization, sometimes they sacrifice the person every hour around the clock for like months. It's like a butcher shoe shop that is never rests. Every hour a person including during the night, like, I mean, all the time, like, sometimes for months, because they had tremendous amount of people, and like, so, I mean, they ruled over a tremendous amount of people, so they could have just, I mean, this could have been done, like, I mean, just, I mean, human sacrifice without end. It's not like that. I mean, they don't have that many people. They are just villages. And even if they take even if they recruit the volunteer from another village, I mean, it's a zero-sum game. I mean, so sometimes so I mean, obviously other times the other village recruits the volunteer from their place. I mean, obviously. So it can be something that you do a lot. You must do it like very rarely, very rarely. So of course this practice is indefensible and like morally wrong. Of course, it's repulsive, but it can't be done a lot. It must have been done, like, I mean, very rarely. And other times it's implied that actually the standard of living is relatively very high. I mean, it's both. It's implied because I said it, but it's also implied by what you can. I mean, from the little bits. It's not a long story, but from the little bits that you can actually get from the story, much is implied. I mean, like, from anthropology perspective, you can gather much from this. Like, I mean, from this description. Like, I mean, because not everybody can actually. Even the small stuff that, I mean, even like small, like, details, like, I mean, that they gather everybody around, that they have like a place that they gather around, like small things that might be obvious to you humans because you live in advanced society. I mean, nothing is obvious for, like, for Paleolithic people. I mean, for them it's not obvious. I mean, that they have, like, I mean, the ability to, quickly, I mean, arrange, like a fishing trip, but you have all sorts of, I mean, all sorts of small things. This actually gives you strong indication that this is very high culture, relatively to what you can find in there. And probably you would be much more protected and much you will live much higher standard of living in such a place than in other places, and also you will probably be much better fed, which is incredibly important in such societies, because in Paleolithic times, I mean, this is not true in Paleolithic times. I mean, hunger was a thing even in the United States until the 20th century. People suffered from hunger even in the United States during the 20th century. And the United States was always the richest, they always, I mean, not always, but since a long time ago, they had like the most money. It's not a new thing, but even them, they still suffer from hunger, in the grapes of wrath, like in the days, like still hunger was still a thing, of mice and men, and like, I mean, you read these like, these stories and like novels, and still there were hungry people in the United States. So so in such a place, your chances of being hungry, which are in general very high in the planet Venus, would have been much lower than average, because they are organized, because they have relatively great fishing, I mean, abilities, and they are organized to do it. Like, I mean, it's not just the technology of like having the correct boats. It's also, again, how to organize like the boats, how to organize the people. It suggests a little bit of politics even, which are important, because I mean, without it, I mean, just every man to himself. Like, it's just, I mean, like Jurassic Park, like Israel of today. That, I mean, like, which is the politics is just, I mean, a very thin game, and that rests upon a mountain of like wolves and lizards that just fight each other. I mean, but this is hell. I mean, politics are needed in order, that, I mean, not every man will be for himself, or every woman for herself. Like, I mean, that people will be, I mean, that will be share interests and will be able to count on each other. I mean, that's, I mean, the supreme, purpose of politics, of the politea, of the idea of like governing society that is not just, I mean, families at best, that, I mean, you just take care of your children at best, and that's it. No, I mean, there is something more than that. and it's implied that such things exist in such villages. So we will probably, your chances of being hungry are tremendously lower than in other places, and also your chances of being murdered because they go together. I mean, there's a huge correlation between the chances of being hungry and the chances of being murdered or be a murderer. Because, I mean, people, I mean, not just the murder is justified in any case, but people in very poor societies they don't even think to it. I mean, obviously crime is much higher and violent crime is much higher than in societies that have, like, that relatively good standard of living. This is both like empirically true and just makes sense, of course. So probably this kind of like villages, there will be a much more comfortable and safe and nicer place to live than every other place in Venus. Now that doesn't mean that the ritual is defendable in any way. And here lies another point that I want to kind of stress, because I understood from the comments that, well, let's say that, I mean, the way that I describe the story, I've done so intentionally, not just from my own point of view, but there are like two, interchanging, point of views in the story. Even three. Like, one is the point of view, the internal point of view, but it's mostly suppressed. But this story was told, as I've told it, intentionally from 2 points of view. 2 points of view. One is the point of view of, in which the implied author is myself. Like, a person that, tells the story from, far away, place and time, and that he gets more knowledge and the knowledgeable, author, even though he's not all knowledgeable, and he admits that he has many kind of things that he doesn't know, but he knows relatively a lot. And the other point of view is the point of view of the settlers, that presumably are not. It's kind of like another topic. Like, what's their position in this place? But for me, it was important to place them in the story, because even though they have no name or specific character, they're just presumably just viewers. Because for me, it was incredibly important to position this episode as an integral part of the horror story, which is the Zionism exploitation of Venus. This is, it's not just, this is incredibly important for me, and for I understood from the comments that not everybody, understood it the same way that I intended. Some people even kind of sort of the settlers as Indiana Jones, figures, they are kind of not necessarily good or evil, perhaps even likable, but not, just pretty much neutral, morally neutral, very curious people that kind of have no boundaries and no limits, but not necessarily evil or specifically evil, just curious and adventurous and curious and morally neutral, pretty much like Indiana Jones. That you like him not because he's specifically righteous or something. He's not. He's even some would say he's even he's a thief, he's a and this is, this position is stated many times in the movies themselves itself. It's even in the Spielberg text. You can also already find the the position that, I mean, the judges the character as a kind of a criminal. Like, I mean, but I mean, even if not, I mean, he's not specifically like, honorable character. But I mean, you like him because he's likable, because he's charismatic and brave, and and the story is told from his point of view. I mean, you could have tell. I mean, the Indiana Jones. I only speak about the three ones. I mean, I'm one of those that they deny the Force and don't. I do not even deny the existence of the fifth because it's not. It's so much. I so much deny it that I do not even deny it. Like, I mean, it's even beneath the denial. Like, I mean, but I mean, so I address the trilogy. So you can say, I mean, we like him, but because he's kind of like because the story is told from his point of view. Of course, you could have told any of the three stories from another point of view, in which perhaps, I mean, he would be less of honorable or even not important at all. Like, I mean, this is I mean, a common criticism of Raiders, of the last arc, which is a great movie. I mean, nobody will say it's not a great movie. It's like, it's like tremendous achievement in cinema. But I mean, some people say that, I mean, from narrative perspective, that he hasn't done anything at all. That I mean, the story would have ended exactly the same way, with the same outcome, even if the main protagonist wouldn't exist at all. So I mean, it's a matter of point of view. Like, how do you judge such characters that are, I mean, and such characters actually, I mean, I mentioned Indiana Jones because such characters, I mean, of course, not just, of course, it's it's exaggerated, but I mean, such characters sometimes, I mean, existed at the beginning of the 20th century. And I mentioned Stephenson, which is a favorite of mine. And he was not, there was nothing fictional about it. He was a Harvard professor, like, I mean, a real Harvard professor, like a bona fide scientist. But also there was much about him that, I mean, and he acted. I mean, he was active, I mean, during the first decades of the 20th century. And yes, there was much about him that, I mean, that was a little bit like, like. I mean, it's not exactly Indiana Jones because he wasn't an archaeologist, he was an anthropologist, which is not, of course, not the same, but it's, I mean, it's certainly it's got some similarities. Like, I mean, like he was interested in human cultures, in the broad sense, and he was a very respected scientist. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, again, the Harvard professor of the highest, like, but he was also, adventurer and some say not always, and many of these people, I mean, sometimes they had to take all sorts of like moral decisions that when they're not always, I mean, they took the best decisions. I mean, it was still, I mean, a time in which, like, not all frontiers was of humans. I mean, it was the last time in history that, I mean, there was still like places in Earth that were not explored by humans, or almost not explored by humans. And I mean, it wasn't like, I mean, it was just, I mean, until all of this pretty much ended during the 1930s or the 1940s, because after that, I mean, there was no such a place, like, in the world that was not claimed by someone, like, I mean, by some kind of, like, strong power, and and like everything was under the control of, like, somebody. And like, even the most remote places were usually claimed by, at least by military, by the USSR or the United States, that I mean kept, like, presence everywhere. And even more so than today, it was important to them to be everywhere. Like, I mean, but I mean, it was the last time in history in which was still such things were possible in Earth. And these people, I mean, not always, like, I mean, they had a lot, like, I mean, even though sometimes they were associated with respected universities. Again, Stephenson was a Harvard professor, but like the real Harvard. I mean, there are all sorts of, like, mockeries, but no, the real thing. So, but I mean, it's not like, I mean, most of what these people did, I mean, they did by their own volition. Like, I mean, maybe they got a little bit of money from, the workplace, but I mean, mostly they depended on their own, like, decisions and, like, and long-term adventures that many times ended with death. and that was them. This was the case for the known, like the people, the conquerors of the North Pole, Edmundson, this like that. Many times it ended in death, not only of them, but of many of their companions. Like this was, they were scientists, but they were scientists of the type that not exist today much, but that scientists that on the one hand, like real scientists, like respected scientists. On the other hand, scientists of the type that many times they just found they die, there's part of their job. It was common, but not only that, but they also carry to death with them all sort of companions. Many times, a lot of companions. So, they were. Some would say they were. Neutral. Morally neutral. It's not easy to kind of to defend everything that these people have done. Let's just say if you don't really, I don't know to what extent, you understand you know of what kind of people I speak about, because they were famous in the generation before, or 2 generations before us, but they are less common represented in our culture today. But there is one exception which I might point to, which is it's very fictional, but it's just it's a I try to search for things from popular culture, so people can maybe relate to it. So the movie that from our generation that I recall is Up of Pixar. The main antagonist Up is obviously to some extent is based on Charles Lindbergh, which was another kind of explorer, but to a larger extent is based on the scientist type that I speak, the Edmundson or Stephenson, these kind of scientists from the first decades of the 20th century. It was kind of a character that was, again, a generation ago, or 2 generations ago, it was more of a stock character, in many, people were much more aware of such characters. There were stock characters in many, popular culture artifacts. And today they are kind of forgotten. But some kind of representation, you can see in Up, which is relatively, relatively new, maybe 15 years ago, I don't know, and movie. And so the antagonist, the bad guy is clearly, based on these people, and also to some extent on Charles Lindbergh, but mostly on these kind of people. And of course, they are related. Charles Lindbergh was also, arguably related to the same milieu of people, that, from the same time and, the same kind of, tendencies. Now, why do I say all that? Because, from my perspective, it's important to set all this aside, because I cannot stomach the idea that these people in this story, let's say the Europeans, even though we should remember they were barbarians themselves. The settlers in this story are people that are, there is not they're not Indiana Jones. They are more Billy the Kid, from the Wild West. The attitudes and culture were much more that of people of the Wild West, American Wild West, than scientists from from Up because they were not that educated, and they were pretty barbarian and lawless, and in general the place was the Wild West. The Ottoman, Palestine was like a Wild West. There wasn't much generally, there weren't many places in Palestine, weren't many people, and mostly there were Arabs that were cultivating grounds that in kind of a feudal system in which they don't the farmers don't even cultivate their own land. They cultivate all sort of lands that actually, I mean, at least formally belong to other people that many times actually where they actually set was in Syria or places like this, or maybe in Jerusalem, maybe maybe even like in Syria. It was a very backward society, and I mean, even for the end of the 19th century, I mean, or the beginning of the 20th century, it was a backward society, and a not important society. It should say it. I mean, the place was incredibly non-important. Like, I mean, a good description of European that, I mean, of the time, I mean, can be found in Mark Twain. That, I mean, that traveled, you know, among other places, the Holy Land, and described it. And mostly what you get from his description, I've read it, and mostly what you get from this description is that it just, I mean, wasn't important. It was a small place with very little people, and there isn't much to say about it because it's such, I mean, it wasn't a wasteland. Like, I mean, it wasn't like you know, the desolation of smog. Okay, there were people in here, but I mean, not much, and the place is small, and so mostly it was like the Wild West. So these people, from and you cannot, like, I mean, you cannot, I mean, give them any kind of like a benefit of a doubt, because there is no doubt here. Whatever they done there, and they done a lot. I mean, it was it was terribly wrong, and that's, I mean, a point of contention that I have, I think, with some of the commentators. I mean, of the story that, I mean, I've read. Like, I mean, that I think that some people, I mean, sort of these people as, like, I mean, as described in the story, is perhaps, I mean, morally neutral. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, not commendable, but I mean, yeah, like, I mean, maybe like Indiana Jones, or like, you know, like these kind of like scientists that I described, like, you know, from the time. Like, I mean, they were not, I mean, you know, no, they were not the righteous, I mean, righteous, and, you know, but they people, like, sometimes, I mean, like, you know, adored them, or I mean, became fan of them because of, you know, of perceived, like, you know, bravery and, you know, charisma, but not specifically because they were good people. But that was not a situation. These people were evil, and for me, like, the like the fact that I, like, you know, I chose to mention that they accepted, I mean, the polite, you know, invitation to take a bite of this. It's not just a kind of like it's, from my perspective, this is not a kind of like, you know, like that you see the shadow of Darth Vader on the behind, like the photograph of the child Anakin Skywalker in Tatooine. No, this is Darth Vader. I mean, it's not the shadow of Darth Vader. This is Darth Vader. I mean, it's not like, I mean, a hint towards moral decay. This is full-blown moral decay. I mean, this is, I mean, it's not, you don't need to wait for an advancement, like in this story, to see how these people will become like a child, I mean, or molesters, you know, and child killers, and like, I mean, what do you think? I mean, it's already, like, I mean, the worst Darth Vader that you can think of. I mean, it's already there. Like, I mean, there is no, like, I mean, now, you know, a small, like a long decline of the characters, you know, until they will become the child abusers that they were, and the rapists, and you know, and of course, like, you know, the robbers, and, you know, the killers. They are already dead. I mean, this is it. If you see such a thing and you participate in it, you are already this. I mean, you are already, I mean, you know, a rapist and a murderer and a robber, and a murderer and a robber. You are already, I mean, the scum of the earth. There is no, it's not a hint. It's not like, I mean, the shadow of nothing. This is the real thing. It's the real thing. I mean, and nothing, I mean, not much, I mean, there is much to be said, but I mean, not much needed to be said in order to understand that these people were the worst of the worst. Now, why do I say all that? Because, to some extent, I think, maybe it's kind of like a long shot, or I mean, maybe you will find it far-fetched, but I think that, I mean, this, I mean, difference in interpretation of this, like, small, bit of information that they actually, I mean, agreed to politely, participate in this meal. Like, I mean, the different way in which, I mean, probably people interpret it is to me, it's indicative of like of a huge problem of humanity today. Because, I mean, I do not accept any excuse for other nations to in any way sustain, I mean, the crimes of Israel today. I even if they do not make any profit from the crimes of the state of Israel, and many do have profits. But even if, let's say, that they don't make any profit of it, I mean, it's unacceptable from my point of view, and also from the point of view of the cherubs, that are the civilization that I represent. They, for them, it's, I mean, from them it's the earth. Like, I mean, they don't. It's like it's a planet. Like, I mean, they don't care much about Israel, and certainly they will not. I mean, any kind of excuse like to say that, I mean, no, it's not us, it's Israel. They do their own things, we do our own. This is they don't even listen to such, I mean, excuses. I mean, it's not something. It's not. It's out of the it's out of their scope. Like, I mean, they. It's not only that it's like they do not accept it as an excuse. They don't even listen to it. It's not something that they accept at all. Just it's out of the scope, out of the view. Like, no, I mean, these are people of the earth. You have responsibility towards, like, whatever you do to other planets. I mean, you cannot. I mean, you cannot treat the Venusians in a terrible way, in terrible ways that are described in this channel for a long time now. You cannot do it at all, and it doesn't matter if, like, you are Israelis or Americans or Indonesians. The cherubs they don't care. They just don't care. You need to understand it. I mean, it's Earth and Venus, two planets. I mean, they don't care about Israel at all. And if you think that, I mean, it would kind of like excuse to say that the Israelis are doing their things, and I mean, it's not your fault. Just say, so, I mean, you live in like in you don't understand reality. It's like a psychosis. Like, I mean, that you're detached from reality, because the reality is that there are other sentient species in this universe, and they watch you, and they don't. I mean, for them, it's not even like this kind of like argument is completely invalid. Like, I mean, completely invalid. So, no, I mean, you cannot. I mean. And of course, that this amplifies tremendously if you are like you make profit from the crimes of the state of Israel, and which, of course, this is, I mean, the situation that is. I mean, this is like the parallel situation in the story, because they have eaten it and they've enjoyed the tea, and later they. I mean, it was a huge part of the exploitation, because this, of course, this story takes place in a very early stage in which they still didn't understand like the tea. I mean, but later they did understand it, and it was, up until this day, it's a huge part of this exploitation. This is a very early stage, but I mean, just from this early stage, early stage in which presumably you can say that they didn't profit from the ceremony, because, I mean, in retrospective, they did profit because they understood that they're eating something that is presumably beneficial to them, and they liked it. But I mean, you can say that while they've eaten it, they didn't, for them it was just, I mean, being polite or something like that. But even that is completely unacceptable. I mean, not at all. I mean, it's one way to say what I'm saying in the beginning of this video, that I mean, that to say that, I mean, such ceremonies, I mean, yes, they show relatively high level of culture, and probably, I mean, such cultures in relation to other places in Venus are better places to be part of, like, I mean, the other places. But on the same time, I mean, from the foreigner point of view, even foreigner from the beginning of the 20th century, that, I mean, they don't have the same luxuries that, I mean, people have today, but they still have tremendously higher standard of living. I mean, still, even if it's the Wild West, I mean, they still have tremendously higher, like, standard of living than these Paleolithic people. I mean, it's incomparable. They have no, I mean, from their perspective, this is evil, like, I mean, and they cannot, I mean, they cannot, I mean, enjoy it in any way. They cannot participate in it in any way. I mean, just no. I mean, if they have no choice at all, then either, I mean, if, I mean, there's like a gun to their heads, and they have, like, they either must participate in it or just not be there, then they should not be there, which is another valid option, not be there at all. I mean, nobody, I mean, forced you to even be there. You could always take the choice not to be there. And if you are there and you are forced to eat it, like people tell you, you either eat it or we kill you. So, I mean, don't be there. Don't be there. You cannot be an innocent bystander in such when you see such crimes. I mean, your mere presence in there, even if you don't eat it, even if you just watch it, your mere presence, I mean, is part of, like, a huge crime, Okay, so I'll stop now. I mean, just rest a little bit, but I have other things I wanted to say regarding this story. So I'll continue in a couple of minutes with some additional points of analysis.